Hi, I'm Gemma and welcome back to Crime Dog. We are back this week with a story of a horrendous murder committed in a small town just near Avignon. This is in the south of France. We are going to tell the story of Christophe Lejard. This is a story of a murder plot carried out by a complete amateur that somehow managed to evade the police for over a year. It's crime time. This story takes place in 2010, but we are going to go back 25 years to when Christophe Lejard meets the love of his life, Roselyne. They meet, fall madly in love, and get married. They quickly settle in a small town called Rognonnas, and they start a family, and Christophe buys a small joinery business which is specialized in installing windows. They have one child together who is called Christopher. So the dad is Christoph, the child is Christopher. When our story takes place, they have been married for 25 years. So it's 2010 and Christoph's small business has taken flight. He now has 17 employees. When Roselyne and Christophe did get married, she already had 2 sons from a previous marriage, one of which is called Arnaud. Arnaud, in recent years, did not get along with Christophe so well, so he decided to move to Normandy. The morning of the 24th of November 2010, Christophe leaves for work as usual between 6:30 and 7 a.m. To set the scene, it is the early hours of the morning in winter in the south of France, and so when you step outside you can't see anything or anyone. Christophe is swiftly followed by his son Christopher, who also works at the family joinery. Christopher leaves the house at around 7:30 in the morning. Christopher starts his car and begins to drive down the driveway when he spots his father's car stopped at the gate. His dad's car is in the middle of the driveway and the engine is still running. This is weird because his dad left some time ago to go to the joinery and his car is still there. Now remember, it's still pitch black, so he gets out of the car and comes closer to inspect the bizarre scene. And what he sees is his father lying next to the car in a huge pool of blood. He doesn't hesitate and he runs back to the house, telling his mum to immediately call an ambulance. The ambulance arrives very quickly. His blood is still warm, but he's dead. The scene is deemed quite sinister, and so it is cleared immediately for police detectives and forensic experts to come in and sweep for evidence. It's important to mention that the driveway to the Lejard property was quite long, and Christophe's car was found stopped at the gate, still inside the driveway. The gate is still closed. What's weird about this is that the gate was normally open. Always open. This would allow for a window of opportunity in which the killer, who was lying in wait, could load and fire his rifle. Christophe Lejard was shot from behind. Receiving a bullet from a shotgun directly to the back of the head killed him instantly. He had walked into a fatal trap. When the forensics sweep the area, they find a cigarette butt in the exact location which they believe the killer would have positioned himself waiting for Christophe. They also find 2 sets of DNA on the gate. When the family household is questioned, none of them smoke, so it is very likely that if they find DNA on the cigarette, they will have their prime suspect. The evidence goes to experts for analysis. The setup of the murder allows us to understand a couple of details about the killer. The killer must have known a few details about Christophe. 1, what time he would leave his house. 2, that he would leave alone. 3, that he was the first person to leave his house in the morning. And 4, what kind of car he drove. Killer must have meticulously planned this because we know that less than an hour later, Christoph's son, would be driving out the same driveway through the same gate, going to the same place. This means that there was not much margin for error. So who knows all of this information and has a motive to kill him? At Christoph's joinery, there was 17 employees in the small town of Rognonas. So we have a selection of people who know where he lives and what time he would go to work. But what has Christoph done that could have potentially given them motive enough to murder him? Then we have his stepson, Arnaud, who never fully accepted Christoph as his dad and so moved out of the family home. So Arnaud now lives in Normandy in the north of France. Could this family feud be motive enough for murder? When the police questioned Arnaud, he was indeed in Normandy. Arnaud's alibi checks out. His wife, Roselyne, also knew all of the details needed to be the murderer in this case, but she too has an alibi. She was sleeping in the house at the moment of the murder, and this is confirmed by her 2 sons. The police quickly ask the neighbours if they heard a gunshot. The neighbours say, yes, we did, but we just thought it was a hunter. However, they did spot something unusual the day before. They had noticed a motorbike parked outside the Lejard property, and nobody in the Lejard family has a motorbike. If the motorbike does belong to the murderer, we can probably rule out any kind of professional hit, because it's very unprofessional to leave your motorbike outside the house in which you are going to murder someone the following day. However, the police take note of the vehicle and be sure to follow up on it later. It was determined that Christoph was murdered by a 12 caliber hunting rifle due to the fragments of lead found embedded in the back of his neck. The DNA results on the cigarette butt come up negative, which is very odd. You're almost certain to get a DNA sample from a cigarette because you're normally touching it with your saliva, but the killer in this case must have barely touched the cigarette. It does amuse me how often the killers in France leave a cigarette butt at the scene, right next to the body that they've just murdered. Yeah. But luckily for our killer, this time, somehow he managed to leave no DNA sample on the cigarette. Back to the evidence. The gate came up with 2 sets of DNA. The first was quickly identified as Christoph's DNA, but the second, the police run through their database and there is no match. They're pretty convinced that if they find the match of DNA to this sample, they will have their killer. They begin taking DNA samples from everyone who has recently come into contact with Christoph. This, although a brilliant method, may take some time. Meanwhile, they continue collecting evidence and witness statements. According to 2 of Christoph's very close friends who he would frequently go fishing with, they noticed that cracks began to show in Christoph's marriage to Roselyne around 2009, and Christoph told them that he was planning on filing for divorce. Roselyne, the grieving widow, had forgot to mention the pending divorce to the police. So they feel like they're onto something, but need more information. Christoph's sister, Maryse Lejard, has some very interesting information for the police. Firstly, she was shocked at how basic her brother's funeral was. There was no music, no emotional readings, nobody was asked to talk about Christoph and the experiences and the memories they'd shared together. There was a couple texts from the Bible thrown in, but that was it. It was of course Roselyne who had organised the funeral, and Maryse finds it so peculiar that she goes to ask her about it. Maryse is kind of shocked by how not sad Roselyne is. She actually seems smiling and happy at her husband's funeral. She feels like something is not right and she is starting to get a little bit suspicious. So she begins to do some investigating herself. She begins a conversation with Roselyne about how she hopes that we soon find the killer. In a baffling statement, Roselyne declares that her husband committed suicide, obviously. Maryse is dumbfounded. Why would Roselyne think that she would believe this? That her brother had somehow shot himself in the back of the neck with a 12 caliber hunting rifle, which is a pretty big rifle, in the back of the neck, remember. It physically is impossible. Maryse is no detective, but she is well aware that this is baloney. So she tells the police about Roselyne's upbeat humour at the funeral and the bizarre suicide story. She then hits the police with a bombshell. Her and her brother were pretty close. They would talk a lot, and according to Christoph, he was scared of his wife. In fact, he was convinced that she was going to kill him. Roselyne had been trained to administer medicine to patients, and so she knew a thing or two about drugs and medications. This, paired with the fact that he is convinced of his wife's malicious tendencies, forces him to stop drinking or eating anything from their family home fridge. He only drinks tap water when he's at the home, and he only eats food that he has bought himself. He's convinced that she is trying to poison him. And most importantly, Maryse tells the police that Christoph knew and had planned a date for finally leaving his family home. It was to be the weekend after he was murdered. The police also uncover many letters to Christoph's lawyer attempting to rush through the divorce proceedings, as he had allegedly become too frightened to go home. She had become verbally abusive and was set on finding ways to make his life a misery. In one instance, she swapped his mattress for an old mattress that she knew would cause him back pain. To avoid conflicts, Christoph would intentionally work long hours, leaving before 7 a.m. in the morning and often arriving home after 8 p.m. Further witness statements from close friends revealed that Christoph had felt like he was being punished and his home had become like a war zone. The evidence piling up against Roselyne as motive for murder is mounting up, but it is about to get a lot worse for her. On the 3rd of December 2010, just days after the assassination of Christophe Lejard, a beautiful blonde woman walks into the police station asking to talk specifically to the detectives working on the Lejard case. Her name is Liliane Berger and she is a local hairdresser working in the village. She states that she and Christoph were once lovers when they were young and they had recently rekindled their relationship just 6 months ago through Facebook. They fell immediately head over heels for one another and were planning on moving in together. The widow Roselyne is questioned for a second time, but this time the police go much harder on her. The police ask her about the divorce and she states yes, they were indeed planning on getting a divorce, but it was from her. She wanted the divorce. They then directly ask her about Liliane Berger, the lover of her husband, and she states she knows absolutely nothing about this. Then they ask her who she thinks would want to kill her husband. She states she knows exactly who the killer might be. Her husband was allegedly embezzling money and stealing from his employees. It was inevitable that all of his actions would eventually catch up on him. The police firstly check at the joinery to see if any of the staff have a vendetta against Christoph. In all of the testimonies, they say unanimously that Christoph was a very nice boss. Then they plough through 3 years of bookkeeping meticulously, and there's absolutely nothing sinister. They then try to verify the claim she made, stating that she was the one who had asked for the divorce. However, it is clear from email communication between the two that it was absolutely Christoph who wanted the divorce. What is quite telling, however, is why she would want to lead them on a wild goose chase. With no further leads in the case, the police continue to take DNA samples of everyone who has crossed paths with Christoph. Finally, 1 year later, they have a DNA match. A young 26-year-old man named Christopher Munch. Munch was a workman who had done a few odd jobs at the Lejard home address. He had a small list of petty crimes to his name, such as theft and use of some narcotics, but nothing really serious. What is strange about Munch is that he is from Normandy and still lives in Normandy. When he's asked about how his DNA got on the gate at the Lejard home address, he states that it must have been from when he did the odd jobs. But the police lean in and they say there is no way it could have been from when you did the odd jobs. That was months prior to the murder, and with rain and time, the DNA would have washed off. So tell us the truth. Unfortunately, there are 2 pieces of evidence placing him in Rognonas on the night of Christoph's murder. One, he had been flashed by a speed camera on the way down from Normandy, and then he had stopped to buy a coffee with his card on the way back up. He finally admits that Roselyne had paid him to come that evening. She had paid him to come all the way from Normandy to close the gate. Nothing else. How much did she pay you? The police ask. 15,000 euros, he says. 15,000 euros to come all the way from Normandy to close the gate, they ask. Yes, he says. The police keep piling on the pressure, and finally Rosalind breaks. She admits that she had paid Christopher Munch 15,000 euros to assassinate her husband. She had actually been overheard saying that she could not bear the thought of her husband walking away with half of their wealth. But this story is far from finished, because there is something wrong with this case. Nowhere, absolutely nowhere, can the police find any calls or communication between Rosalind and Munch. That means one thing: there was a third person involved in this story. Now, if you've been listening carefully, you will have spotted a massive clue pointing at who exactly the third person is in this case. That's right, Christopher Munch was from Normandy, and Normandy is where the stepson of Christoph, Arnaud, currently lives. The police secretly bug Munch's phone, and soon after they listen in to a phone call between Munch and Arnaud. The phone call reveals that Arnaud was indeed heavily involved in the murder plot to assassinate his stepfather. With all the information they need, they arrest Arnaud. Arnaud very quickly admits to being involved in the murder plot, but blames it on the pressure he was receiving from his mother. His mother would call all the time, telling him she was in danger and that Christoph was planning on killing her. At the time this drama was unfolding, Arnaud was best friends with Christopher Munch. And this is how Munch became entangled in their murder plot. All three of them are arrested with murder or conspiracy to commit murder. In one last, final, odd turn of events, in this case, a woman called Sylvie Colomel comes forward to the police. She had recently been released from prison, in which she shared a cell with Rosalind. She claims that Rosalind had offered to pay her 15,000 euros to kill Christopher Munch because Christopher Munch had made too many errors, and that is why they were all in prison. She had asked Sylvie to poison Munch to punish him for these errors. During the trial, there is a lot of speculation over the real motive in this murder. Was she jealous because he left her for another woman? Did she want to keep their accumulative wealth for herself, almost 1 million euros? Was her pride damaged? She didn't want to be tossed away for another woman. Maybe she couldn't stand the thought of Christoph with someone else. Arnaud, the stepson of Christoph, was given 15 years in prison for conspiracy to commit murder. Munch was given 20 years in prison for murder, and the highest sentence of all of them was actually given to Rosalind. She was given 25 years in prison. She was ruled to have been the instigator in this murder and to have manipulated the two younger men into committing it for her. So that's all for this week. We aim to bring you some of the most outrageous crimes that have ever been committed on French soil. From horrific stories dating back to the 19th century to modern mysteries. If there are any stories you would like us to cover, let us know down in the comments below. And you can also click here if you want to see more. Thank you so much for watching. That's all for this week. Au revoir les amis, à la prochaine.